Hello and welcome to Tanner's Table. Today's recipe is one of my all-time favorites, acorn squash kimchi stew. This is a perfect one-pot recipe for those cold nights in, and it's a wonderful soup for when you're feeling a bit under the weather. The star of this recipe is acorn squash. You can find them year-round at most supermarkets, but definitely in the autumn, winter, and early spring at your local farmers markets. Acorn squash can look a little tricky to cut at first, but it's easier than it looks. We're going to start by cutting this guy straight down the middle using one of the grooves along the sides as a guide and slicing straight downwards. As you can see inside the half, acorn squash have a thick flesh that gets super tender and delicious when stewed in a recipe like this. And the skin is actually edible too, so there's no need to remove it. Like most squash, there's a pocket in the center for seeds, so we're going to clean that out of both halves with a spoon, scraping up those seeds for compost. Next, we're going to cut this guy into wedges about an inch thick or so, using the grooves along the side of the squash as a rough guide. Having these thick wedges of squash in the stew is going to give it a really meaty, hearty texture that's both filling and satisfying. For this second half, we need to remove the stem, and I find that the flesh right around the stem can be a bit woody, so I think it's best to cut a little triangle around it and remove the stem for compost before cutting this half of the squash into wedges as well. One of my favorite things about this recipe is that as you work, you can throw all of this stuff into a pot or a Dutch oven. There's no need to worry about cooking anything separately or browning anything. The next thing going into our pot is 1 yellow onion, thinly sliced, 5 to 6 cloves of garlic, also thinly sliced, a 3-inch piece of ginger, and I peeled mine, but you don't have to, 1 tablespoon of white miso paste, and 1 tablespoon of Korean gochujang. Now, while I recommend keeping both white miso paste and gochujang in your kitchen due to their nearly indefinite shelf life and endless culinary uses, if you don't have them around, you can substitute for 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika and an optional teaspoon of fish sauce. And finally, we can add in 2 cups of roughly chopped kimchi along with all their kimchi juices. Mine is homemade and I'm going to have a recipe for this soon, but store-bought is totally fine for this recipe. Now that most everything is in, we can put the pot over medium-high heat and add in 1.5 quarts of chicken stock. And if you prefer to use vegetable broth, that's great in this. If you have some bone broth around, that's amazing too. Personally, I do prefer how chicken stock tastes in this, and Better Than Bouillon has an amazing vegan chicken base if you can find it in your area. But whatever you choose, give it all a good mix, get everything as submerged as possible, bring to a simmer, and cook uncovered for 30 minutes. You'll see the stew reduce by a few inches, concentrating those flavors. After 30 minutes, mix in 2 cans of rinsed white beans such as cannellini or Great Northerns. Get those submerged, bring back to a simmer, and cook for 10 more minutes, letting those beans soak in all the spicy kimchi flavors. Once the beans are nice and tender, turn off the heat, add in the juice of 1/2 of a lemon, and taste the stew for seasoning. If it needs more acidity, add a bit more lemon juice. If it needs some salt, I recommend adding a teaspoon or 2 of soy sauce. And if it needs a bit more meatiness, I recommend a teaspoon or 2 of Worcestershire sauce. Once the taste is to your liking, it's ready to enjoy. I like to garnish with some scallions or some chopped parsley or some lao gama chili crisp for some extra umami. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you decide to make this. If you do, please leave a comment below or shoot me a message. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. As always, the recipe is written out in full on my website, tannerstable.com, and you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. If you like what you've seen here, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps a lot.